On a golden late afternoon, the setting sun bathed the quiet, affluent suburb in a warm, peaceful glow. Towering oak trees lined the road, casting long shadows across the smooth asphalt. Gliding effortlessly through the neighborhood in a sleek black Mercedes S-Class was Isabel Sterling, a poised and intelligent black woman in her 40s. Dressed in a tailored business suit, she radiated quiet authority, her posture calm and assured after a long day of high-stakes work. As classical music played softly from the luxury vehicle's sound system, Isabel allowed herself a rare moment of peace. Little did she know that this moment would soon be shattered. Unbeknownst to anyone observing her composed demeanor, Isabel was no ordinary citizen. She was the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one of the most powerful law enforcement figures in the country. Her position demanded sharp intellect, resilience, and a deep commitment to justice. Yet even her high rank and spotless record could not shield her from the biases and abuses she was about to face. Without warning, flashing red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror, and the wail of a siren pierced the stillness. A local police cruiser tailed her closely, signaling for her to pull over. Confused but composed, Isabel complied, knowing she had broken no laws. She slowed her vehicle to a stop, turned down the music, and rolled down the window halfway. Years of law enforcement experience told her that something was off. As the patrol car doors opened and two officers stepped out, scanning her vehicle with a look of suspicion, Isabel braced herself. Not for a routine traffic stop, but for something far more insidious, rooted not in justice, but in prejudice. As the two officers approached her vehicle, Isabel Sterling immediately sensed the shift in energy. Officer Ray Kowski, the older of the two, wore a smirk that barely concealed his disdain. Behind him, Officer Mark Jenkins stood with a hand resting on his gun belt, his eyes darting around the luxury vehicle with suspicion. The initial reason for the stop was flimsy. Kowski claimed she had been speeding, though Isabel knew with certainty she had obeyed the speed limit. His tone lacked basic respect, and the vague explanation was clearly a pretext. When asked what she did for a living, the question came not out of curiosity, but as a veiled accusation. To them, a black woman in a Mercedes could not have earned her wealth lawfully. It was a dangerous and all too common assumption rooted in deep prejudice. Kowski's attitude turned from condescension to thinly veiled intimidation. He hinted that the situation could go away if Isabel were willing to settle it there, on the roadside, with cash. The attempted extortion was blatant, and Jenkins watched closely, waiting for her reaction. But Isabel, seasoned in law enforcement and unshaken by corruption, refused with steely calm. Her voice was firm and precise, making it clear she would not tolerate abuse of authority. That refusal shattered their expectations. Rather than the submissive fear they were used to, they were met with unwavering strength. Infuriated by her defiance and unable to manipulate her, the officers' true nature emerged. Their professionalism crumbled as they hurled racist and sexist insults, accusing her of being a criminal simply because she refused to comply with their unlawful demands. It was no longer about law, it was about power, control, and prejudice, and they were determined to assert it, no matter how illegal or immoral their actions became. Officer Kowski's frustration boiled into rage as Isabel Sterling remained unshaken. Her refusal to be intimidated or bribed challenged not just his authority but his ego. His voice turned hostile, and with venom in his words, he unleashed a tirade of vulgar, racially charged insults. Without justification or legal basis, he barked orders at Jenkins to arrest her on fabricated charges, resisting law enforcement, disturbing public order, and disobeying police instructions. The charges were lies, made up on the spot to justify their abuse of power. Isabel, understanding the danger of physical resistance, complied with their orders while verbally protesting the illegality of their actions. Her calm demeanor and composure only seemed to fuel their aggression. Jenkins yanked open the car door and twisted Isabel's arm behind her back with unnecessary force. She cried out in pain as he clamped the handcuffs tightly, the cold metal biting into her wrists. With visible malice, they dragged her out of the car and shoved her into the backseat of the patrol vehicle like a criminal. All the while they continued to berate her, dehumanizing her with every word. Inside the cramped back seat, Isabel sat with her back straight, her expression a mask of control. But beneath the surface, a storm of fury and resolve brewed. She took mental note of everything: names, badge numbers, car unit ID, time and location, preparing for what would come next. The officers believed they had conquered her, that they had taught her a lesson. What they didn't realize was that they had just made the gravest mistake of their careers. They hadn't detained a powerless civilian. They had unlawfully arrested one of the highest-ranking officials in federal law enforcement, and the reckoning that awaited them would be swift, devastating, and public. The patrol car pulled into the small, aging police station, where Isabel Sterling was unceremoniously dragged inside like a dangerous suspect. Still handcuffed, she was marched through the musty hallways toward the duty desk, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. Sergeant Miller, a graying officer behind the counter, looked up as the two arresting officers announced their catch with smug pride. Kowski listed off the bogus charges with confidence, tossing Isabel's ID and vehicle documents on the counter. But the moment Sergeant Miller glanced at the name, Isabel Sterling, something shifted. It sounded familiar. Uneasy, he began typing her name into the system as part of the standard intake process. Then came the question that shattered the illusion of control. "Occupation?" Miller asked routinely. Isabel raised her head, her voice calm and steady, each word deliberate and clear. "Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room fell into immediate silence. Sergeant Miller froze, his pen dropping from his hand. His eyes darted from her face to the computer screen in disbelief. He stuttered the title aloud, realizing the gravity of what had just occurred. Kowski and Jenkins went deathly pale. In an instant, their arrogant posturing crumbled. The woman they had tried to humiliate, extort, and illegally arrest was one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the nation. The weight of their mistake hit them like a freight train. Kowski's knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor, trembling. Jenkins followed, falling to his knees in tears, begging for forgiveness. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. No longer the predators, they were exposed, terrified, and desperate. Isabel didn't speak to them. She turned to Sergeant Miller with icy authority, demanding her release and immediate contact with the FBI. The reckoning had begun, and she would ensure justice was delivered. The revelation of Isabel Sterling's true identity as Deputy Director of the FBI sent shockwaves through the entire police station. Within minutes, phones were ringing off the hook. Sergeant Miller, now pale and panicked, scrambled to unlock Isabel's handcuffs with trembling hands. She stood tall and composed, demanding contact with the FBI field office and the immediate involvement of her superiors. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. In record time, high-ranking officials, including the police chief, the city's mayor, and senior FBI agents descended upon the station. Their expressions were a mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief. This was not just a professional disaster, it was a scandal of national proportions. Officers Ray Kowski and Mark Jenkins were swiftly suspended without pay. Their weapons and badges were confiscated on the spot. The FBI took over the investigation, placing the officers in isolation and subjecting them to intensive interrogation. Under pressure, both men broke down. They confessed to the fabricated charges, the attempted bribe, and the racially motivated aggression, though each tried to shift blame onto the other. But the evidence, body cam footage, patrol logs, dash cam recordings, and Isabel's detailed testimony left no room for denial. Further investigation uncovered troubling patterns. Kowski had a documented history of excessive force and discrimination complaints, which had been repeatedly ignored by internal reviews. Jenkins, though newer, had already accrued several warnings for aggressive behavior during traffic stops. Their records, combined with the public profile of their victim, turned the case into a national example of systemic abuse. The U.S. Department of Justice and the District Attorney's Office quickly assembled a joint prosecution team. Kowski and Jenkins faced a wide array of charges, including federal civil rights violations, conspiracy to extort, unlawful arrest, abuse of official authority, and obstruction of justice. With overwhelming evidence and growing media scrutiny, it was clear their downfall was imminent. The system they had once weaponized against others was now closing in on them, and this time, it was working exactly as it should. The trial of officers Ray Kowski and Mark Jenkins quickly became a national spectacle, drawing intense media coverage and public attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, civil rights advocates, and law enforcement officials, all eager to witness justice in action. The evidence against the two officers was overwhelming: body cam and dash cam footage, internal patrol records, and the testimonies of multiple witnesses. But the most powerful testimony came from Deputy Director Isabel Sterling herself. Calm, composed, and eloquent, she detailed every moment of the incident with unwavering precision, exposing not just the personal misconduct of the officers but the broader failures of the system that had allowed such abuse to persist. The defense attorneys attempted to portray the incident as a misunderstanding, blaming stress, heavy workloads, and systemic flaws, but these arguments rang hollow against the undeniable facts and the sheer brutality of the officers' actions. The jury deliberated for a short time before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on all major charges. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered his final sentencing remarks. In a scathing statement, the federal judge condemned Kowski and Jenkins for their betrayal of public trust, their blatant racism, and their abuse of authority. He emphasized that their actions not only harmed an individual, but eroded the integrity of the entire justice system. To send a clear message, he imposed a severe sentence: 15 years in federal prison for each of them, with no possibility of early parole. The verdict was hailed as a landmark moment. For many, it was not just a punishment, but a long overdue affirmation that no one is above the law. And for Isabel Sterling, it was a reminder of why she had chosen to dedicate her life to justice, to ensure that accountability and truth would always prevail. The conviction and sentencing of officers Kowski and Jenkins sent ripples far beyond the courtroom. Across the nation, the case was seen as a powerful wake-up call, an undeniable example of the deep-rooted issues of racial profiling, abuse of power, and lack of accountability in local law enforcement. Civil rights organizations applauded the outcome, calling it a major victory in the ongoing fight against systemic injustice. The story of Isabel Sterling, a black woman and top federal official who faced the very discrimination she had spent her life combating, became a symbol of resilience, justice, and change. News outlets covered the case extensively, and public conversations about police reform surged in its aftermath. Police departments across the country felt the pressure. Many initiated internal audits, retraining programs, and revisions to their oversight policies. The department where Kowski and Jenkins had served underwent a full administrative overhaul. Federal agencies increased scrutiny of local law enforcement units with prior complaints of misconduct, and new guidelines were introduced to prevent similar abuses of authority. For the public, especially minority communities, the case restored a sense of hope that the system, when held accountable, could still deliver justice. Meanwhile, within the FBI, Isabel Sterling's actions were held in the highest regard. She did not use her power for vengeance, but instead allowed the justice system to speak through truth and process. Her choice to remain professional and steadfast in the face of personal violation inspired many, both within law enforcement and among the public. Though the experience was painful, it reaffirmed her commitment to reform and integrity in justice. Her story became part of training materials and lectures in police academies nationwide, serving as both a warning and an example. Justice had not only been served, it had sparked a movement. This story serves as a powerful reminder that dignity, integrity, and justice must be upheld at all costs, regardless of one's background or profession. It speaks deeply to the enduring truth that character is revealed not in comfort, but in confrontation. Deputy Director Isabel Sterling's unwavering strength in the face of abuse reminds us that courage isn't loud, it is quiet, firm, and principled. For those of us who have lived through changing times and witnessed the slow march of justice, her story is both painful and empowering. It also reminds us that no one is above the law, and that power, when abused, must be held accountable. Age brings wisdom, and with it the understanding that justice is not always swift, but with persistence and truth it will come. For older generations who have long advocated for fairness, equality, and respect, this story reaffirms that standing up against wrongdoing is always the right thing, even when it's hard. And perhaps the most timeless lesson: true strength lies not in domination, but in restraint and integrity. As we share stories like these with younger generations, we pass on not just memories but values that can light the way forward.